Hello and welcome back to The Banker magazine. My name is Michelle Price. I'm business editor of The Banker, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about one of our reports that we are publishing in the magazine this month, looking at banking IT infrastructures post the crisis. Now, what should a bank's IT infrastructure look like? How much of it should be managed by people outside the organisation? How much of it should be managed by the internal IT department? How should you pay for it? How should you consume it? These are the types of questions that many CIOs and IT chiefs are now asking themselves in the wake of the recession. So if banks' ROE are going to be flagging in the long term and we can't really push up the ROE via the cost-cutting measures that often focus on IT budgets, then where does that leave us? Well, for many banks, especially in Europe, they'll have to be looking for other types of business models. And one of the arguments that one consultancy has put forward is that really the IT department itself will have to start driving profitability. In a recent survey by professional services firm KPMG, it transpired that 78% of the CIO survey said that producing value was their number one priority for the next couple of years going forward. But in an IT context, what does value really mean? Well, it does mean driving profitability. So there are various issues here that the banks will have to deal with, because moving to new IT infrastructure isn't really a painless or simple task. Now, although recent evidence from other firms like Celent suggests that IT spending in the financial services industry is actually going to recover quite remarkably so in the next few years, money isn't really enough to tackle some of the really embedded problems that a lot of banks have when it comes to their IT infrastructure. And this is what pundits in the industry are very familiar with, and it's well known. It's the kind of legacy hairball. And it really is an issue that many of the largest banks are tackling and having to embrace, according to some consultancies, if they really want to move forward and can provide the speed and agility necessary to support new business models. Talking to vendors in the community, you can see that they've really tried to change the way they operate their businesses to adapt to what the banks want. And I was talking to one vendor, one core banking vendor, who said that what their clients really want now is speed. They say, make it easy for me to consume your IT and make it happen fast. And in one sort of incident, this IT vendor actually had to help a bank converge 4 different acquisitions in the space of 90 days, which is absolutely remarkable when you really look at the challenges involved. So tackling the legacy hairball is one issue that is definitely top of the agenda for some banks, but the question is really whether or not they can actually make it happen. IT pundits in the financial services industry have been talking for years about this. It's not in any way a new issue, but there are some alarmist messages coming out of some organisations who claim that actually there are now huge business risks being created for banks if they don't really start to tackle this big problem. But the other issue is that the cost of ripping out legacy infrastructure and replacing it is so huge, it will be very difficult for CIOs to make a business case. So actually, there is an argument to suggest that the banks have a huge IT dilemma on their hands right now, and it will be very interesting to see how that plays out going forward. Now, there are some new IT models that the banks can call upon, and one of those, of course, is the cloud, much talked of, much debated, and still a little bit of a mystery where the financial services industry is concerned. The banks, in many ways, are at the forefront of cutting-edge technology, especially in the front offices, where they've really driven some incredible lightning-fast technology that they use for their trading platforms and so on. But when it comes to certain types of IT infrastructure, they can actually be quite conservative, particularly since banks hold a lot of highly sensitive data. And the cloud, which is really a way of delivering IT services over the internet, rather than deploying the infrastructure in-house, that infrastructure is very expensive to maintain. It takes up data center space. Data center space is really expensive. So the idea that you could consume IT services over the internet without having to take on any of those costs yourself should be very appealing for banks, particularly since they have this IT legacy infrastructure problem. It means that they can get online really fast. They can start consuming all types of, for example, customer relationship management software without really having to worry too much about everything else they've already got inside their bank. But the issue is, according to one source, that many banks are still very, very concerned about the security aspects and what they perceive to be a lack of security. And so some banks have actually decided to move to a sort of internal cloud model where they're pooling and virtualizing their internal resources, and then desktop users and traders or whoever can run their applications in the normal manner, but those applications can kind of source power more dynamically from this internal pool of virtualized resources. That all sounds great, but it seems to me and to many others that the banks can't really ignore the public cloud, the external cloud that's provided by other IT services providers, for long. So it'll be interesting to see how this pans out. Banking IT chiefs are actually taking quite a leading role in the industry in terms of trying to drive forward more standards around the cloud issue. And Sean Keeley at Deutsche Bank has actually chaired, or is beginning to chair, one of the key industry forums in this respect. So we're now seeing some key industry figures starting to put the bank's agenda forward when it comes to cloud computing. And I think this is actually quite an interesting time for the cloud computing model, especially with regard to financial services. So we'll see how that pans out in due course. And finally, the other area that the report will be examining is pricing. So with the slump and the relating budgetary cuts, we know that banks have come under pressure to, in turn, try and cut down their vendors and the prices and the price lists that they pay for their IT services and their licenses and their hardware maintenance and myriad of other things that that the vendors provide for them. And we have one report looking at really the different dynamic ways in which banks have driven down those prices and tried to spread the cost of their IT infrastructure over a period of months and years. One IT chief has claimed that this has actually really improved the relationship with his vendors, and that it's been a really beneficial experience. Now, I'm not quite sure if the vendors feel the same way, and I would imagine that actually when we see IT investment returning in the next couple of years, that sort of new and improved relationship might actually be tested once again as the vendors try to push up their list price and aren't really prepared to be flexible anymore regarding what they are going to charge and when they're going to charge it. So there are lots of interesting things happening in the financial services IT space going forward, and I think the next couple of years might see a seminal shift, but we'll have to wait and see.